That bastard is not my grandson. My mother-in-law shouted those words at my own baby shower, right after throwing a pile of my hand-wrapped gifts straight into the trash. 50 of our closest friends and family members froze. The room went so quiet you could hear a fork hit a porcelain plate. I didn't scream. I didn't run away in tears. I calmly walked over to the $600 tiered cake we'd bought for the occasion. My mother-in-law smirked at me, thinking she had finally humiliated me enough to break me. She had no idea what I was holding. I slid a sealed clinic envelope under her plate. It was a piece of paper that didn't just prove her wrong, it proved her golden boy son was hiding a secret that was about to burn her precious reputation to the ground. When she opened it, she literally collapsed onto the hardwood floor. What happened next didn't just end a party. It dismantled years of cruel lies and permanently shattered their picture-perfect family image. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. My name is Chloe. I'm 28 years old. To understand how I ended up at my own baby shower holding an envelope that would destroy my marriage, you have to understand Julian's mother, Evelyn. In Julian's family, image isn't just important, it's everything. Evelyn spent 30 years building a pedestal for her only son, and she wasn't about to let a defective daughter-in-law knock him off it. We started trying for a baby 2 years after we got married. I remember the first Sunday dinner where Evelyn decided the delay was my fault. We were sitting in her formal dining room, the kind with the heavy lace tablecloths and the silverware that feels like it's being audited. Evelyn was serving her pot roast. She looked at my plate, then at my waistline, and sighed. It was a loud, practiced sound. "You're looking a bit thin, Chloe," she said, resting her chin on her hand. "A woman needs a little more substance if she's going to carry the next generation of this family. Are you sure you're taking care of yourself, or is there something else?" "Wrong," I looked at Julian. He was busy cutting his meat into perfect, identical cubes. He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. He just let the word wrong hang in the air like a bad smell. "We're just taking our time, Evelyn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, Julian has always been so healthy," she continued, pouring him more wine. "A regular athlete. My side of the family is incredibly fertile. My grandmother had 12. It usually comes down to the woman, doesn't it?" Julian finally spoke. "The roast is great, Mom." That was his contribution. That was the first time he handed me the shield and told me to stand in front of him. I didn't mind it at first. I loved him. I thought that's what wives did, we protect their pride. I thought his silence was just awkwardness. I didn't realize it was a strategy. By the second year of trying, the passive-aggressive comments turned into a full-scale interrogation. Every family gathering followed the same script. Evelyn would find a way to get me alone in the kitchen or by the coat rack. She'd ask about my cycles, my diet, my stress levels. She once handed me a business card for a specialist she knew, implying I needed fixing before I wasted any more of her son's time. Julian knew I was crying in the car on the way home. He'd pat my hand and tell me his mother just wanted to be a grandma. He never told her to stop. He never told her that he was the one who refused to go to the doctor for a simple checkup because the idea of a cup and a clinic was embarrassing for a man like him. I was the one who went through the invasive tests. I was the one who had the dye injected into my fallopian tubes to see if they were blocked. I sat in those cold waiting rooms alone, reading old magazines, while the doctors told me I was perfectly healthy. I had no issues. I was ready. When I brought the news home to Julian, I expected relief. Instead, he looked terrified. He sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor. "So it's not you," he whispered. "It's not me, Julian. We need you to go in. It's just a formality." He didn't move for a long time. That was the night the first clinic envelope arrived in the mail. It was just a welcome packet, a list of instructions for the male partner. I left it on his nightstand. When I came back from brushing my teeth, he had stuffed it into the back of his sock drawer. The next Sunday, Evelyn pulled me aside again. This time she didn't whisper. She did it in front of his aunts while we were clearing the dessert plates. "I heard you've been seeing a specialist, Chloe. It's such a shame. I always hoped Julian would marry someone sturdy. Is it a permanent problem or just a lack of vitamins?" One of the aunts looked at me with pity. It's a specific kind of look that makes you feel like a broken clock. I looked at Julian, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, anything, about the tests I'd passed. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Mom, Chloe is doing everything she can. Let's just leave it at that." He made it sound like he was defending me. In reality, he was confirming her suspicion. He was letting her believe I was the problem so he didn't have to face the possibility that he wasn't the perfect specimen his mother raised him to be. I took the hit. I literally stood there and nodded while they discussed my reproductive health over lemon bars. I swallowed the lump in my throat because I thought my marriage was worth my reputation. I thought my loyalty would eventually earn his. That was my mistake. A week later, Julian finally went to the clinic. He only went because I told him I wouldn't go to another Sunday dinner until he did. He was gone for 40 minutes. When he came back, he didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. 3 days later, the results came in. I saw the envelope on the counter when I got home from work. It was thick. It was sealed. It was from the fertility center, addressed only to him. Julian was sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off. He hadn't even taken off his work jacket. The envelope was open in front of him. He looked like he had seen a ghost, or maybe just the end of the world. "Julian," I asked, reaching for the light switch. "Don't," he said. His voice was cracked. "Just don't." I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. He was shaking. He pushed the paper toward me. I read the words azoospermia and 0 count. I saw the clinical notes explaining that natural conception was impossible for him. He didn't look at me. He put his head in his hands and started to sob. Not the kind of sob you see in movies, but a quiet, pathetic sound. "You can't tell her," he choked out. "Chloe, please, my mother. She'll never look at me the same way. She'll think I'm not a man. You have to promise me. Nobody can ever know." I held him. I felt his tears soaking into my shirt. In that moment, I felt a wave of protective love. I told him it was okay. I told him we'd find a way. I told him his secret was safe with me. I had no idea I was signing a contract for my own execution. The diagnostic papers were the first undeniable cost. Seeing the words "impossible" on a medical form changes the way a man looks at his wife, especially a man like Julian. He didn't see me as a partner anymore. He saw me as a vault. I was the person who held the one truth that could destroy his entire identity. Instead of bringing us closer, the secret became a wall. Julian started working later. He stopped meeting my eyes. But the real damage started on a Tuesday, about 3 weeks after the diagnosis. I was at my desk at the architectural firm when my phone buzzed. It was a group text from Evelyn to Julian, his 2 sisters, and me. "I've booked an appointment with Dr. Arasov for next Thursday morning. He's the top fertility specialist in the state. Chloe, I've already sent over your previous records. Julian, you just need to show up to support her. We're going to get to the bottom of why this isn't happening." My heart dropped. She had bypassed me entirely. She was treating my body like a family project that needed a better manager. I waited for Julian to reply. I waited for him to say we had it under control or that we were already seeing someone. Nothing. He didn't text back for 4 hours. When he finally did, he sent a private message to me, not the group. "Just go with it for now. If I cancel, she'll ask why. If we go, the doctor will just tell her what we already know about you being fine and maybe she'll back off. He wanted me to go to a new doctor, undergo more exams, and let his mother believe I was the one being investigated just so he wouldn't have to face her. "I'm not doing it, Julian," I told him that night. I was standing in the kitchen, still in my coat. "I'm not letting your mother send my medical history to random doctors. And I'm certainly not going through more tests when we already have the answer." Julian was leaning against the counter, nursing a glass of scotch. He looked tired, but there was a new edge to his voice, a defensive, sharp edge. "It's one appointment, Chloe, just one. If you refuse, she's going to think you're hiding something. She's already starting to say you aren't being transparent with the family." "I am hiding something," I snapped. "I'm hiding your secret. I am the only reason she hasn't realized her golden son isn't perfect. I have been taking the blame for 2 years, Julian. My reputation in your family is already trashed. They think I'm broken. They look at me like I'm a faulty appliance. And you want to make it worse." Julian stepped closer. He didn't look sad anymore. He looked desperate. "If she finds out it's me, she'll tell everyone. You know how she is. She'll tell the aunts, the cousins, the people at the club. I'll be the guy who can't." "I can't have that, Chloe. I'm an executive. I have a reputation. Just do this for me, please." That was the first time I realized his ego was more important than my dignity. He wasn't asking for my help. He was demanding my sacrifice. I didn't go to the appointment. I told Evelyn I had a work conflict. The fallout was immediate. Evelyn called me 3 times in 1 hour. When I didn't answer, she called my office. My assistant had to tell her I was in a meeting. That evening, Julian came home and threw his keys on the table. "She's hysterical, Chloe. She thinks you're giving up on the family. She told my sisters that you're being selfish." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I told her I'd talk to you," he said. He wouldn't look at me. "I told her you were just stressed." He let her believe I was the problem again. He was actively participating in the character assassination of his own wife. The cost wasn't just a missed doctor's appointment. It was the slow, deliberate stripping away of my standing in the family. I was being moved from loved daughter-in-law to problematic wife. A few nights later, we were at a birthday party for his younger sister, Maya. It was a small gathering, maybe 15 people in Maya's backyard. I was standing by the drinks tub when I overheard Julian talking to his brother-in-law, Mark. "Yeah, it's tough," Julian was saying, his voice low but clear. "We're doing everything we can, but you know. It's out of my hands. I'm just trying to be supportive while Chloe figures out her health stuff. It's a lot for a guy to carry, but I'm sticking by her." Mark patted him on the back. "You're a good man, Julian. Most guys would have lost their patience by now. It's hard when the woman can't give you what you need." I stood there, frozen, holding a plastic cup of lukewarm soda. Julian wasn't just staying silent anymore. He was actively lying. He was building himself up as a martyr, a saintly husband enduring the burden of an infertile wife. He looked over and saw me. For a split second, I saw a flash of guilt in his eyes. Then he smiled, that perfect, polished Julian smile, and toasted his drink toward me. "There she is," he called out to the group. "My brave girl." The room looked at me with a mixture of pity and judgment. I could practically hear their thoughts. Poor Julian. He wants kids so bad, and she's the one holding him back. I felt sick. I wanted to scream the truth right there on the patio. I wanted to pull the lab report out of my purse and shove it in their faces. But I didn't. I stayed silent because I had promised him. I thought that keeping my word made me the better person. I didn't realize that in a family like this, being the better person just makes you the easiest target. That night, for the first time, I slept in the guest room. Julian didn't even ask why. He just closed our bedroom door and turned off the light. He was safe behind his wall of lies, and he didn't care that I was shivering on the other side of it. The damage was real now. It wasn't just a secret, it was a weapon. And Julian had just handed the handle to his mother. The harm didn't stay confined to our dinner table. It started to leak out, staining every interaction I had with Julian's world. While I was drowning in the shame of a failure that wasn't mine, Julian was flourishing. He'd never been more popular with his family. He was the tragic hero, the man who stayed with his difficult and barren wife out of some noble, misguided sense of duty. By the time we decided to start IVF, the family narrative was set in stone. Evelyn started calling my mother. That was a new level of violation. My mother is a soft-spoken woman who lives 3 states away, and she called me one evening sounding breathless and confused. "Chloe, is everything all right? Evelyn called me today." She was. She said she was concerned about your medical fragile state. She mentioned something about you needing to be more cooperative with the doctors so Julian can finally have his heir. She sounded so disappointed, honey. I sat on the floor of my closet, the only place I felt I could speak without Julian hearing. "Mom, I'm fine. It's complicated." "She made it sound like you were the reason the marriage was straining," my mom whispered. "She said Julian was a saint for putting up with the mood swings from the hormones. Are the hormones that bad?" I hadn't even started the hormones yet. Julian was telling his mother I was already on medication to explain away why I was being cold or distant. In reality, I was distant because I was watching my husband build a throne out of the lies he told about my body. He was benefiting from my silence. Every time Evelyn brought him a support gift, a bottle of expensive bourbon, a new set of golf clubs, she'd give me a look that said I was the thief who had stolen his chance at a normal life. We moved forward with the IVF using a donor. This was the only way, the doctors said. Because of Julian's condition, we needed someone else's contribution to make a life. Julian insisted on a blind donor, someone we would never meet, someone who looked just like him. "If the kid looks like me, she'll never know," he said, staring at the donor profiles on his laptop. "We can just tell her it finally happened. We don't ever mention the donor. We don't ever mention the clinic. It's a miracle. That's the story." "It's a lie, Julian," I said. "It's a solution," he snapped. I agreed. I wanted a baby so much that I was willing to live in his house of cards. We signed the legal consent forms at the clinic, thick, terrifying stacks of paper that confirmed Julian was not the biological father but would be the legal one. He signed his name with a flourish, then pushed the pen toward me. "This stays between us and the clinic," he warned. "If this gets out, I'm done. My career, my family. I'll be a joke." I was already a joke. I didn't see how his reputation mattered more than the truth, but I signed. When the pregnancy test finally came back positive, I thought the clouds would break. I thought Evelyn would finally be happy and Julian would finally feel secure. I was wrong. The moment we announced the news at a family barbecue, the atmosphere didn't turn to joy. It turned to suspicion. Evelyn didn't hug me. She hugged Julian. She held him for a long time, whispering loud enough for the aunts to hear. "I knew my boy would get there eventually. I knew your strength would overcome, whatever was holding you back." Then she turned to me. Her eyes were like flint. "It's funny, Chloe, after 3 years of nothing and all those issues you had, it just happens the month after you refused to see that specialist I found. Almost seems like you were waiting for something." The implication was a physical blow. She wasn't saying I was cured. She was saying I had been lying about being infertile, or worse, that the baby wasn't Julian's. I looked at Julian, waiting for him to shut it down. I waited for him to say, "Mom, that's enough, we did this together." Instead, he laughed nervously. "It's a miracle, Mom. I don't know how she did it, honestly. I'd just about given up hope myself." I don't know how she did it. With 7 words, he threw the doors wide open for her. He didn't just plant the seed of doubt, he watered it. He made it sound like he was as surprised as she was. He made it sound like he wasn't part of the process. He saved his masculine pride by implying his wife might be a cheater. The whisper campaign started that afternoon. I saw the cousins huddled in the corner of the yard, glancing at my stomach and then at their phones. I saw Evelyn's best friend, Brenda, shaking her head while looking at me. By the end of the week, I received a message from my own cousin, who I'm usually close with. "Hey Chloe, I'm so happy for you, but people are talking. Evelyn is telling everyone she's praying for the baby to look like Julian because the timing is so weird. Is there anything you need to tell us?" My pregnancy was being treated like a crime scene. Julian was the victim, and I was the prime suspect. And the person who had handed the police the evidence was my own husband. The weight of it was crushing. I was carrying a child, dealing with morning sickness and exhaustion, and I had to do it while the entire social circle we belonged to was debating my fidelity. Every time I walked into a room, the conversation stopped. Every time I posted a sonogram photo, the comments were filled with "God works in mysterious ways," and "hope he has the family eyes." Julian stayed silent. He played the part of the doting, slightly confused father-to-be perfectly. The breaking point came in our kitchen 2 months into the pregnancy. Julian was on the phone with his mother. He didn't know I was standing in the mudroom. "I know, Mom," Julian said, his voice low. "I know the timing is strange, I'm not blind, but what am I supposed to do? Blow up the marriage now?" There was a pause while Evelyn spoke. "A paternity test," Julian sighed. "I mean, maybe. It might be necessary just to put everyone's mind at ease. I'll think about how to bring it up to her. Just keep it quiet for now, okay?" He didn't defend me. He agreed that a test might be necessary. He was willing to subject me to the ultimate humiliation, testing our child to prove I wasn't a whore just to keep his mother's favor. I leaned against the wall, my hand over my stomach. I felt the first flutter of the baby, a tiny movement that should have been a miracle. Instead, it felt like a warning. I realized then that Julian didn't love me. He loved the version of himself that lived in his mother's head, and he would kill my reputation 1,000 times over to keep that version alive. That was the night I stopped being a vault. I went to the guest room and locked the door. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just waited for the mail. The harassment didn't stay behind closed doors anymore. It started to bleed into my daily life, turning the world outside my house into a second arena of judgment. By the time I was 5 months pregnant, the isolation was physical. It started with the voicemails. Evelyn didn't just call to check in, she called to demand. I'd wake up to 3-minute recordings of her voice, rising in pitch as she worked herself into a frenzy. "Chloe, I saw the photo you posted of the nursery," one message began, her tone clipped and cold. "Yellow walls, it's a very neutral choice, almost as if you're trying to hide something. Julian was always a blue ribbon boy. If you're feeling guilty about the paternity, coming clean now would be much easier than waiting for a DNA test to do it for you. Think about the family name if you're capable of thinking about anyone but yourself." I played that message for Julian while he was putting on his tie for work. I wanted him to hear the venom. I wanted him to see what his silence was feeding. He didn't even stop adjusting his knot. "She's just old-fashioned, Chloe. She's anxious. Just ignore her." Ignore her. I felt the heat rising in my chest. She's calling me a liar and a cheater on my own voicemail. She's telling people this baby isn't yours. How can you just stand there? "Because I know the truth," he said, finally looking at me. "And as long as I'm not worried, you shouldn't be. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. You're being hormonal." That was his new favorite word, hormonal. It was the perfect rug to sweep my valid anger under. If I was upset, it was the pregnancy. If I was defensive, it was the biological stress. He used my own body as an excuse to ignore the fire his mother was lighting under our lives. The social spillover happened a week later at a neutral family gathering. a retirement party for one of Julian's senior partners. It was a black tie event at a downtown hotel. I had spent an hour finding a dress that made me feel like a person instead of a target. When we walked in, I saw two of Julian's cousins, Sarah and Megan, standing by the bar. We had gone on double dates for years. We had been friends. I smiled and started to walk toward them. They both looked at me, looked at my stomach, and then looked at each other. They didn't smile back. They didn't even wave. They turned their backs and began a very intense conversation with a stranger standing next to them. I stood in the middle of the ballroom, clutching my sparkling water, feeling the coldness of the room settle into my bones. It wasn't just Evelyn anymore. The poison had reached the people I thought were my peers. I looked for Julian. He was across the room, laughing with his boss, looking every bit the successful, stable man. He was thriving in the light while I was being pushed further into the shadows. He never checked on me. He never noticed that his wife was being treated like a pariah in a room full of people we'd known for a decade. When we got home, I told him I wouldn't be attending any more family events until he spoke to his mother. "You're overreacting," he said, kicking off his shoes. "Sarah and Megan were probably just busy. You're looking for reasons to be a victim, Chloe." "I am a victim," I said, my voice steady. "I am a victim of your cowardice." He stopped. He looked at me with a coldness I hadn't seen before. "If you tell her I'm gone, I mean it. I will tell everyone you're crazy and that you made up the medical records to trap me. My mother will believe me. Who do you think they'll choose?" That was the first time he threatened me. The man I had protected for years was now using the very lie I kept for him as a noose around my neck. He knew I had no proof on me. He knew his family would side with him in a heartbeat. The dread was a constant weight now. I was high risk. My blood pressure was creeping up, and I was living in a house with a man who was willing to let me be branded a cheater just to keep his mother's delusion of his perfection intact. I realized that the baby shower, which was only 3 weeks away, wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a trial. Evelyn was already organizing it, and the guest list was 50 people deep. She was inviting everyone, the cousins who wouldn't look at me, the aunts who whispered, and the friends who were starting to ask questions. Julian told me to just play along and be grateful his mother was spending so much money on the event. "It'll be fine," he promised. "Once the baby is born and he looks like me, this will all blow over." But the baby wouldn't look like him. Not really. The baby was from a donor. Julian was banking on a genetic lottery that he had no right to win. I sat in the nursery that night, staring at the yellow walls. I felt the baby kick again, a sharp, insistent poke. It felt like the baby was telling me to wake up. I was the only one this child had. If I didn't protect myself, who would protect him? I realized then that Julian was never going to step up. He was never going to be the man I thought I married. He was a coward who had built a life out of my suffering, and he was fully prepared to let that continue forever. He thought he had me cornered. He thought my loyalty was a permanent condition. He was wrong. My loyalty ended where my son's future began. I picked up my phone and called my sister, Jenna. It was 11:00 p.m. "Jenna," I said when she picked up, "I need you to come over tomorrow, and I need you to bring your laptop. I'm done." "I've been waiting for this call for 6 months," she said. That was the first night I slept more than 3 hours. The decision was made. The spillover had reached the limit, and the flood was coming. Jenna didn't say, "I told you so." She just sat on my guest room floor, surrounded by the printouts of the voicemails she had transcribed and the medical records I had finally pulled from the back of the sock drawer. She looked at the clinical diagnosis of Julian's infertility, then at the IVF consent forms with his signature. "He's not just letting them hit you, Chloe," Jenna said, her voice dropping into that low, dangerous register she gets when she's truly angry. He's handing them the stones. He is actively participating in the destruction of your character to save a version of himself that doesn't even exist. He's scared, Jenna, I said, though the words felt like ash in my mouth. He thinks his mother will disown him. Then let her, Jenna snapped. If her love is conditioned on him being a biological miracle, it's not love anyway. But look at what you're carrying. You're 6 months pregnant. Your blood pressure is through the roof. You are protecting a man who is literally watching his mother call you a cheater and damaged goods, and then nodding his head in agreement. She was right. The clarity of an outsider is a cold thing, but I needed the chill to wake me up. I had been so deep in the loyalty mindset that I hadn't noticed I was the only one playing by the rules. I was following a code of honor in a house of thieves. Jenna stayed over that night. We didn't spend the time crying. We spent it organizing. She helped me create a digital backup of every medical document, every laboratory report, and every single voicemail Evelyn had left. "You're not a victim anymore," Jenna told me as she clicked upload on the cloud drive. "You're a witness. And it's time to give your testimony." The support didn't give me an instant victory. It didn't make the dread go away, but it changed the way I looked at Julian when he came home the next day. He tried his usual routine, a quick kiss on the cheek, a complaint about his boss, and then a pivot to how difficult his mother was being about the shower catering. "She wants the expensive tiered cake," he said, loosening his tie. "I told her to just do it. It'll make her happy, and maybe she'll stop asking about the paternity test for 5 minutes." "You told her that?" I asked. "You told her that buying a cake would buy us 5 minutes of peace from her accusing me of infidelity?" Julian rolled his eyes. "It's a figure of speech, Chloe. Don't be so dramatic." Before Jenna, I would have apologized for being dramatic. Now, I just watched him. I watched the way he moved through the room, so comfortable in the space I was providing for him. He was a parasite living on my reputation. The next morning, Jenna sent me a text. "The clinic called back. The official certified copies are ready. I'll pick them up. You just focus on the baby." I went into the nursery and sat in the rocking chair. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the blow to land. I felt like I was the one holding the hammer. Jenna had given me something Julian never could. She gave me the permission to stop being a martyr. The leverage wasn't just paper anymore. It was the truth, and for the first time, I realized that the truth doesn't need to be defended. It just needs to be spoken. Julian came in a few minutes later, looking at his watch. "My mom wants to know if you've picked out your dress for the shower. She says she wants to make sure it's appropriate for the photos." I looked at him and smiled. It was the first real smile I'd had in weeks. "Tell her not to worry, Julian. I have exactly what I need for the shower." He nodded, satisfied, and walked out. He had no idea that the appropriate thing I was preparing wasn't a dress. It was a mirror, and I was going to make sure everyone in that room had to look into it. The support from Jenna hadn't solved the problem, but it had ended the confusion. I wasn't the broken one. I wasn't the liar. I was just the one who had been holding the secret for a man who didn't deserve it. That was the night I stopped worrying about the bastard comments. I stopped worrying about the whispers. I just started counting down the days until the 50 guests arrived. I knew what was coming. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the explosion. I was the one who had set the fuse. The leverage wasn't a secret anymore. It was a physical weight in my bag. Jenna had delivered the certified copies in a plain manila envelope, the kind that looks official and boring until you look at the letterhead. I sat on my bed and pulled them out. There was the semen analysis from 2 years ago, the one Julian told me he had thrown away because it was too depressing. He hadn't thrown it away. The clinic had it on file. The sperm count was 0, not low, 0. Then there were the IVF consent forms. Julian's signature was on every page. He had signed his name next to the words donor material and non-biological paternity 14 different times. He had known. He had known every single second that he was letting his mother call me a liar. He had known as he watched me cry over the bastard comments. He had known as he miraculously accepted the credit for the pregnancy at the barbecue. I felt a strange, cold calm. For months, I had been trying to figure out how to convince them I was innocent. I realize now that was the wrong goal. You can't convince people who are invested in your guilt. You can only provide a truth so loud they can't pretend they didn't hear it. Julian came into the room, smelling like expensive scotch and the office. He saw the envelope on the bed but didn't recognize it. "Is that the guest list for the shower?" he asked, loosening his cuffs. "My mom wants to make sure we didn't miss the Higgins family. They're big donors to her charity, and she wants them to see us." "You know, as a family." "It's not the guest list, Julian," I said. "I didn't hide the papers. I didn't tuck them away. I let them sit there in the light." "Well, whatever it is, put it away," he said, turning toward the closet. "We have a big day tomorrow. Mom spent $600 on that cake alone. She's been bragging about it all week. It's a 4-tiered lemon chiffon with gold leaf. She says it's regal, fit for a first grandson." "A first grandson," I repeated. "Is that what she's calling him? You know how she is. She's finally happy, Chloe. Can we just have one day where you aren't looking for a fight? Just wear the blue dress, smile at the Higgins family, and let her have her moment. Once the baby is here, she'll settle down." He was so certain. He truly believed he could lie his way into a happy ending. He thought that if he just ignored the fire long enough, the house would stop burning. "I'm not wearing the blue dress," I said quietly. He stopped and looked at me, his hand on a hanger. "What?" "I'm wearing the white one, the one Jenna bought me, and I'm going to make sure everyone sees exactly what's in this envelope, Julian. I'm done being your human shield." Julian laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "You won't do anything. You love me too much to ruin me. And besides, who's going to believe you? It's your word against mine, and my mother already thinks you're a cheat. You show them those papers, and I'll just say you forged them because you're having a breakdown. I've already laid the groundwork, Chloe. Everyone thinks you're unstable." That was the confirmation. He hadn't just been passive, he had been preparing his defense. He had been telling people I was unstable, so that if I ever told the truth would look like a symptom of a mental illness. "I didn't forge the clinic's seal, Julian, and I didn't forge your signature on the IVF contracts. They're notarized." He stepped toward me, his face turning a dark, mottled red. "Give me those papers." "No, Chloe, give them to me right now." "They're just copies, Julian," I said, standing up. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady. "Jenna has the originals in a safe deposit box, and she has the digital scans. If you touch me or if you try to stop me from going to that shower, she hits send to the entire family email thread tonight." He froze. The realization that he no longer had control over the narrative hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the envelope, then at me, then at the door. He wasn't a golden boy anymore. He was just a small, panicked man in an expensive suit. "You're going to destroy us," he whispered. "No," I said. "You destroyed us the second you let your mother call our son a bastard. I'm just the one turning on the lights." He spent the night on the sofa. I spent the night in the nursery, holding the envelope against my chest. I wasn't a vault anymore. I was a ticking clock. The leverage was real, it was usable, and in 12 hours it was going to change everything. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt ready. I looked out the window at the quiet street. Tomorrow, 50 people were going to walk into a party expecting to celebrate a lie. They were going to leave with a truth they would never be able to forget. The morning of the baby shower, the house felt like a museum, quiet, cold, and filled with things you weren't allowed to touch. Julian was already gone. He'd left early to help his mother oversee the floral arrangements at the venue. He hadn't spoken to me since our confrontation the night before. He just looked at me with a mixture of terror and loathing before clicking his briefcase shut and walking out. I stood in the nursery, looking at the white dress Jenna had bought me. It was simple, elegant, and made me look like the mother I wanted to be, someone who didn't hide. My first move was logistical. I called the clinic. "I need to confirm the pickup of the certified records," I said to the administrator. "Yes, Mrs. Miller. Your sister already picked up the physical copies, and our legal department has the digital versions flagged for release if requested by a court or authorized party. Is there anything else?" "No," I said. "That's all." I wasn't going to use a lawyer yet. I didn't want a legal battle. I wanted a public truth. I tucked the manila envelope into the side pocket of my diaper bag, the one I was bringing to show off to the guests. It was the perfect hiding place. No one looks for a bomb in a bag meant for baby wipes and onesies. My second move was emotional. I sat on the edge of the bed and wrote a text to my own mother. "Mom, whatever happens today, I want you to know I'm okay. I'm finally taking care of myself and the baby. Please stay close to Jenna during the party. I love you." She replied almost instantly with a heart emoji. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew I'd been drowning. Then came the risk move. I had to walk into that room. I had to let Evelyn take the stage. I had to give her the rope she was so eager to tie into a noose. If I shut it down early, she'd just play the victim later. I needed her to be as loud and as public as possible. I needed the 50 guests, the Higgins family, the aunts, the cousins, to see the full extent of her cruelty before I showed them the source of it. I arrived at the venue, a high-end private room at a local botanical garden, at 1:00 p.m. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Evelyn was in her element. She was wearing a champagne-colored suit that probably cost more than my first car. She was holding a glass of Prosecco, holding court near the $600 tiered cake. The cake was a monster. 4 tiers of lemon chiffon dripping in gold leaf topped with a delicate porcelain cradle. It sat on a pedestal like an altar. "There she is," Evelyn called out as I walked in. The room went quiet. It wasn't a friendly quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens when the person everyone was just gossiping about enters the room. "The guest of honor. You're late, Chloe." "But I suppose we should be used to you moving on your own schedule by now." Julian was standing behind her. He looked gray. His eyes darted to my bag, then back to his mother. He looked like he was waiting for a heart attack. "I'm here now, Evelyn," I said. I walked over and kissed her cheek. She stiffened as if I were made of glass. "Well, sit down," she said, gesturing to a chair at the head of the long table. "We have a lot to get through, and the Higgins family is eager to hear about your health journey." I smiled. I shook hands with women who had ignored my texts for months. I listened to the miracle talk. I watched the way they looked at Julian with admiration and at me with squinted eyes. Jenna arrived 20 minutes later. She sat directly across from me. She didn't say a word, but she placed her phone face up on the table. I knew what that meant. The digital backup was ready. The send button was one thumb press away. As the appetizers were cleared, Evelyn stood up. She tapped her glass with a silver spoon. The ringing sound was sharp and final. "Before we open the gifts," she said, her voice projecting to the back of the room, "I want to say a few words about family, about legacy, about the importance of the Miller name." She looked directly at me. The smirk was back. She thought she had me. She thought this was the moment she would publicly forgive me while making sure everyone knew there was something to forgive. "We've all heard the rumors," she continued, and a collective gasp went through the aunts. "And Julian and I have discussed how to move forward with grace, because a Miller always does the right thing, even when others don't." Julian shifted in his seat. He looked like he wanted to vanish. He reached out and touched her arm, a weak gesture of restraint. "Mom, maybe not now." "No, Julian," she said, shaking him off. "The truth sets us free, doesn't it, Chloe?" I think it's time we address the elephant in the room before we welcome this new addition to our lineage. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. My heart stopped. I realized she had gone ahead and printed out a demand for a paternity test. She was going to present it to me in front of 50 people. The threshold was here. The countdown had hit 0. "I have a gift for you, Chloe," she said, her voice dripping with mock kindness. "A way for you to clear your name once and for all, or a way for us to know exactly who we are inviting into this family." She slid the folded paper across the white linen tablecloth. It stopped right next to my water glass. "Open it," she commanded. The room was so still I could hear the wind brushing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. 50 pairs of eyes were locked on me. Julian was staring at the tablecloth, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. I didn't touch her paper. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the sealed clinic envelope. "I have a gift for you too, Evelyn," I said. My voice was calm. It was the calmest I had been in 3 years. I didn't open hers. I slid mine across the table, right under the edge of her gold-rimmed porcelain plate. "It's not just a gift," I said. "It's an education. I think you should read it before you say another word about the Miller legacy." Evelyn laughed, a high, tinkling sound. "What is this? A letter from your lawyer?" "Don't be dramatic, Chloe. It's the truth, Evelyn, the one Julian has been hiding in your sock drawer for 2 years." The color drained from Julian's face so fast he looked like a statue. He looked at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. "Mom, don't," Julian whispered. But Evelyn was already reaching for the seal. She was so confident in her victory that she didn't see the trap until she was already inside it. "Let's see what the unstable girl has to say for herself," she said. She tore the envelope open. Evelyn didn't read the papers at first. She scanned them with the impatient look of a woman checking a dry-cleaning receipt. She wanted to find a typo, a reason to laugh, a way to turn the moment back into a joke. But then her eyes hit the bolded clinical header, diagnosis, obstructive azoospermia. She stopped breathing. I watched her collarbone lock into place. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the industrial refrigerator in the catering kitchen. 50 people were leaning in, their forks suspended, their glasses forgotten. "What is this?" Evelyn whispered. The high, tinkling glass in her voice was gone. It was replaced by something thin and jagged. "It's the reason we needed a donor, Evelyn," I said. I kept my voice at a conversational volume, the kind you use to discuss the weather. "It's the medical proof that Julian has been infertile since before we even met. And those pages behind it. Those are the IVF consent forms Julian signed 6 months ago. The ones where he legally acknowledged that he is not the biological father of this child, but that he was choosing to proceed with a donor." Evelyn's head snapped toward her son. Julian didn't look at her. He was staring at the $600 tiered cake. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple and disappeared into his collar. He looked like he was vibrating. "Julian, look at me," Evelyn commanded, her voice rising. "Tell me this is a lie. Tell me she forged this. Tell me you didn't. You didn't let her do this." "He didn't let me do anything, Evelyn," I interrupted. "We did it together. Or at least, I thought we did. While I was at the clinic getting injections that made me sick, Julian was sitting at your Sunday dinners letting you call me defective. While I was carrying this baby and dealing with your bastard comments, Julian was nodding along and suggesting we might need a paternity test to put your mind at ease." Aunt Brenda, who had been the loudest whisperer in the group, dropped her appetizer fork. The silver clattered against the porcelain with a sound like a gunshot. She looked from the papers to Julian, her mouth hanging open. "You knew?" Brenda asked, looking at Julian. "You let us think. You let your mother say those things about Chloe." Julian finally broke. He slammed his hand on the table, making the champagne glasses dance. It was private. It was a private medical matter. She had no right to bring this here. You had no right to use me as a human shield for your ego, I shouted back, finally letting the restraint snap. You didn't want a private medical matter, Julian. You wanted a public lie. You wanted everyone to think I was the problem so you could stay the golden boy. You were willing to let our son be born into a family that thought he was a mistake just so you didn't have to admit you weren't perfect. Evelyn was shaking now. She looked down at the papers again, her eyes darting across Julian's signature. She realized, in front of the Higgins family, in front of the aunts, in front of everyone who mattered in her social world, that she had spent months publicly harassing an innocent woman to protect a lie her own son had told her. She looked at the $600 cake. She looked at the gold leaf and the porcelain cradle. Then she looked at the Higgins family, who were now whispering to each other with a frantic, horrified energy. I didn't know, Evelyn stammered. She tried to reach for her Prosecco, but her hand was shaking so hard she knocked the glass over. The pale yellow wine spread across the white tablecloth like an oil slick, soaking into the paper she'd tried to give me. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, I said. You wanted a villain and Julian gave you one, he gave you me. Julian stood up, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. We're leaving, Chloe, get your things, we're going home right now. I'm not going anywhere with you, Julian, I said. I stood up too. I felt the weight of the baby, heavy and real, and for the first time he didn't feel like a burden. He felt like a reason. The house is already packed. Jenna's husband moved my things this morning while you were here helping with the flowers. Julian's face went from red to a ghostly, translucent white. You what? I'm done, Julian. I'm not a vault for your shame anymore. I turned to the room. 50 people were watching me. Some looked ashamed. Some looked thrilled. Most just looked stunned. I hope you all enjoyed the cake, I said. It's lemon chiffon, very regal. I walked over to the gift table. My hand-wrapped gifts, the ones Evelyn had thrown in the trash, were still sitting in the bin by the door. I reached in and pulled out a small, soft teddy bear I'd bought myself. I tucked it under my arm. Wait, Evelyn croaked. She tried to stand up, but her legs seemed to give way. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, and then she simply slid. She didn't fall hard, but she collapsed onto the hardwood floor in a heap of champagne-colored silk. Mom! Julian cried, rushing to her side. The room erupted. Aunts were screaming. The Higgins family was making a break for the exit. Jenna stood up and walked over to me, putting a steady hand on my shoulder. Ready? Jenna asked. I looked back one last time. Evelyn was on the floor, weeping. Julian was kneeling over her, looking at the room full of people who now knew exactly who he was. The Miller legacy was laying in a puddle of spilled Prosecco. I didn't feel the need to stay. I didn't need to hear their apologies. I didn't need to see Julian try to explain the unexplainable. I walked out of the botanical garden and into the fresh air. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was out. The world was moving. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't have a single secret to keep. The fallout was quieter than the explosion. After I walked out of that botanical garden, I didn't go back to the house I shared with Julian. I stayed with Jenna for 3 days, mostly sitting on her porch and watching the cars go by. My phone was a graveyard of notifications. Julian called 82 times. Evelyn sent one long, rambling text about medical privacy and family loyalty before I blocked her number. The divorce was surprisingly fast. Once the medical records were on the table, Julian's lawyers realized there was no reputation left to protect in court. He settled quickly. He kept the house, I kept my peace, and a settlement that ensured my son would never have to ask the Millers for a dime. I heard from Aunt Brenda a few months later. She told me the Higgins family had pulled their support from Evelyn's charity board. The social circle they valued so much had turned into a cold, quiet place. Evelyn doesn't host Sunday dinners anymore. Julian moved 2 towns over. People say he doesn't look anyone in the eye at the grocery store. The last time I saw Julian was at a neutral mediation office to sign the final papers. He looked 10 years older. He started to say he was sorry, but I held up my hand. "Don't, Julian," I said. "You aren't sorry you did it, you're just sorry you got caught." He didn't have a comeback for that. He just signed the paper and left. Now I live in a small house with a garden that isn't formal or regal. It's just full of wild flowers and sun. My son Leo is 6 months old now. He has my eyes and a smile that belongs entirely to him. Sometimes, when I'm rocking him to sleep in the nursery, I think about that $600 cake and the woman who collapsed next to it. I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel light. I learned that you can't save a man who is comfortable using you as a shield. And I learned that the truth doesn't just dismantle lies, it builds a foundation for the life you were actually supposed to live. I look at the photo on my mantelpiece. It's me and Jenna, holding Leo on the day of his christening. No golden leaf, no tiered cakes, just us. Never set yourself on fire to keep a coward warm. It's a lesson that cost me a marriage, but it gave me my life. What would you have done if you heard your partner agreeing to a paternity test they knew was a lie? Have you ever had to take the blame for someone who didn't deserve your loyalty? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. If you want to hear about another time an in-law's public attack backfired horribly, check out the story linked in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe in standing up for the truth. It helps the channel more than you know.